Good evening, Millbury, and welcome to a special edition of the Naff Report. Tonight's show is going to be special in a couple ways. First, normally I have a guest or a small panel on the program. Tonight's going to be different. I regret to inform you all, it's just going to be you and me, Millbury. The reason I wanted to do the show this way this week is because I want to address something that I think is really important for everyone to understand. And that's the upcoming budget for the new fiscal year. Now, most of the folks listening at home will know that I'm running for selectman this spring. And when I set out and launched my campaign, I made it a point to learn as much about the budget as I can. Part of that is the accounting nerd in me, but another part of that is I think it's really important for me as an elected official to understand where my and your tax dollars are spent. So tonight, I'm going to break down the budget in a way that I don't think has been addressed before. There's been a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings, a lot of debates, and sometimes quite a few arguments this year about the upcoming budget. So I wanted to take the time to break it down and go over some really key important metrics that I think is really imperative for us all to understand. So let's get to it. So I'm going to have my trusty whiteboard here, so bear with me as I walk through some of these numbers. So this year, in 2019, the total budget is going to be about $41 to $42 million. The town manager still is estimating some new growth that potentially might be reached. And so this number may change, but that's sort of that's a general basis of where we're going to break some things down tonight. Now, the first real meeting that took place on the budget in a public setting was a budget workshop conducted by the school committee and the Board of Selectmen. The chairwoman of the school committee, Jen Natupsky, called that meeting to sort of bring everyone up to speed on where everyone was in the budget. So it was a workshop, so it wasn't a public hearing. So no one from the audience could get up and speak. We simply had to observe these two key boards and committees talk about the upcoming budget. And I have to tell you, as someone who was there pretty much just as a fly on the wall, it was kind of a frustrating experience because, well, let me say this. I'm a taxpayer in town. I'm from Millbury. I grew up here. I went to Millbury schools K through 12. I had a phenomenal experience as a student. I was a student athlete. I had a phenomenal experience in that realm as well. And I also coach here at the high school. So I can kind of see things from all sides here. I understand where we are currently in our school system, and I understand currently where we are as a town in our tax base. I was hoping this workshop was going to be an opportunity for both sides to sort of come together, hash out some differences, and put a good deal together for the town. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. At that meeting, you had just one table with all the key decision makers. You had the superintendent, the business manager for the school, all the members of the school committee, the chairwoman of the school committee, the chair of the Board of Selectmen, all the Board of Selectmen members, our town manager, and our new finance director. The reason this meeting was frustrating is because for 2.5 hours, everyone talked around this table, but nothing actually really got accomplished. We didn't move the needle any forward, and here's why. The town manager claims about a year ago, he informed the school committee they were only going to get about a 1% increase in funding year over year. So what does that look like in actual dollars? That was going to be about $212,000 year-over-year increase. Well, the school committee said, well, we really need 5.2% of an increase over last year. And what that amounts to is a little over $1.1 million. That's a lot of money. Now, I say that's a lot of money as someone who values the education I received here at Millbury. But I'm also a taxpayer. I don't want my taxes going up any more than you do. But for 2.5 hours, everyone at that meeting spoke around the table, and this didn't change. We left the meeting, and the town manager wanted to stay at 1%. The school committee wanted to stay at 5.2. I think we all would hope that that meeting would be different. One thing to know about our process before a meeting like that takes place, that was on February 20th. And the reason that date is important is because typically in that point in time in the budget timeline, the town manager and the superintendent, whoever they are, whether it was Bob Spade in the past, Susan Hitchcock, now Greg Myers and Dave Marciello, at this point in time, they've already sat down to hash these numbers out, right? But before the 20th, they hadn't. And I don't know why. I'm not here to point fingers at anybody. But I'm just reporting to you that before this meeting, the two of them hadn't sat down. And these two gentlemen are key decision makers in town. And not only are they key decision makers in town, we actually pay them quite a bit of money. Both the town manager and the superintendent make about $140,000 a year. That means collectively we pay them about $280,000 a year. I would like to think that level of spending for taxpayers would mean these two minds can get together and sort of get things done, move the needle on the budget when applicable. But that hadn't happened before then. And that was one of the things that was most frustrating about that meeting. I really think the tension of that meeting, the disagreements in that meeting, could have been avoided if these two gentlemen had sat down before that day. Again, I don't know why that didn't happen, but I know moving forward, I'll really anticipate them getting together so these frustrations at this meeting don't happen. So fast forward a week later, the town manager is meeting with the board and he says, okay, I do have some updates on the budget. I understand the school needs a lot more funding this year. So why don't we counteroffer their 5.2% request and let's offer 2.51% of an increase from last fiscal year. What does that amount to? That is about $535,000. A significant amount of funds. The school committee, the day after this meeting takes place, this Board of Selectmen's meeting took place the week of the 26th, so Tuesday the 27th, okay? The next night at the school committee meeting, they revisit their budget. I think they recognized there's no way we're going to get a 5.2% increase. I think they knew that. I don't want to speak for them, but I think they probably recognized that from the beginning. But budgets are a negotiation, and you have to start somewhere to get to where you want. So I don't think it was wrong for them to ask this much money, even though we can't afford it. What is surprising to me is where they ended up after the workshop. So at that meeting, they said, let's change our request to about 3.9%, which comes out to $825,000. Because of the snow and the weather, the next official presentation for the town manager got pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So last night, he formally presents his budget recommendation to the board. Everyone on the Board of Selectmen was there except for one member, John Adams. He was out on business. And Chairwoman Natupsky of the school committee was in attendance. Superintendent Greg Myers was in attendance. Dave Marciello presents the same number, 2.5%, $535,000. The night before, this past Wednesday, the school committee had not changed their request from 3.9%. I think the budget's really important. So maybe this drawn-out process is good because we can actually take time to decipher the numbers, break them down. But this is still a really big gap. Now, fortunately, town meeting is not until May 1st. So we have some time to figure this out, but it's something we really need to figure out because we cannot present an unbalanced budget at town meeting. Something has to be done where this divide is eliminated. It's going to be hard to do. And I think we're still at this place. We're still at this big gap because rightly or wrongly, I actually don't think either side feels like they're being heard. The town manager is saying, look, I value education. He went to public education. He has 2 degrees from public universities. He goes, but we have other things to fund than the school. Our roads are a problem. Our infrastructure is a problem. He wants to address that. And what he's been trying to say from last year when he was at 1% to the budget on the 20th at 1% to the next meeting and this week, what he's saying is, look, I want to fund education. But it's going to be really difficult to fund education to every dollar that you want and still keep up with the other needs our town has to address. And I think he's right. It would be popular for me to say, well, we need to fund education to the fullest extent. And I think the school committee is well-reasoned in their request. But math is real. There's only so many ways we can divide up $41, $42 million. And I have to tell you, the town manager sometimes, I honestly think sometimes his delivery doesn't help him. But sometimes he's right. You can't funny math. Math is math. We only have so many dollars to go around, and a decent amount of that pie, like the town manager likes to use as an analogy, that has to go to the town. The one thing I thought that was good that came out of that meeting is what Chairman Franny King of the Board of Selectmen said. He goes, instead of thinking about this as school versus town, we have to think of this as one community. And I think he's absolutely right. Chairwoman Natupsky at that initial workshop said, look, the town benefits from a great school system. And she's absolutely right. I own property in town. I don't want a lacking school system to decrease our property values. I don't want that to happen. And I benefited personally from the great school system we have here in town. But again, math is math. So instead of trying to tackle this challenge at pitting one side against the other and having a legitimate divide, a line dividing us, I think we really have to think about everything as one town and one community. Now, in all these discussions, you have the town manager, the superintendent, the board of selectmen, the school committee. These are all the leaders in town trying to do the best that they can for our town. The school committee and superintendent have to advocate for what is best for students. The town manager and board of selectmen have to take the entire thing into the entire picture into consideration. But what really makes this town tick, what really makes this town work, is not who our town manager is, not who our superintendent is, though they're great. Not who our board of selectmen is, though I like every member. And not who our school committee is, though I think they do an excellent job advocating for our town. What's really going to decide how this is all figured out is you. That's who Millbury is. Millbury is not who fills this building, where we are in the high school. Millbury is not just those who fill town hall. Millbury is you. You and I, us, we, one community. We're going to have to figure this out, but we're not going to be able to figure this out if we don't fully comprehend the challenge at hand. So bear with me as I flip the whiteboard over. Live television. Let's take a further breakdown of where we really are financially. And I do think it's important to sort of look at the entire budget and where the school department fits in, because the school department always has been our biggest expense. And this is something I've asked the chairwoman, Jen Natupsky, of the school committee about. You know, what do you think is the proper amount of funding? And I think she brought up a really important point to consider. It's really a sliding scale, community to community. In a city like Worcester, the school department's actually going to be a much smaller portion of the entire annual budget because they have a much bigger police department. They have a much bigger fire department. They have a much bigger public works department. That makes sense. And then she said, if you look at some of the rural communities in Massachusetts, the scale is going to be tipped the other way. School funding might be, 90% of the budget because there isn't much else to fund in town if they're small and rural. So I think really figuring out what amount of funding is appropriate is what we all have to ask ourselves. But I think it's really difficult to do that if we just look at the numbers this year. I think you have to look at the numbers historically. So I graduated in 2009. So 9 years ago, and with the next budget, that'll be 10 years ago. I had a sense that school enrollment was down from when I graduated. So I wanted to look at the actual numbers up. And you can find everything the Mass Department of Education's website. So I looked at total enrollment for the district when I was a student at Millbury. And it was a little over 1,900 students. That's K through 12, all the kids we educate in town. Then I looked at where enrollment is today, or what we anticipate enrollment to be for 2019. That number is going to be a little over 1,700 students. That's a drop of just about 10%. So we're educating 10% less kids than we were 10 years ago. So maybe we're saving money. Not quite. I then looked at the budget from 10 years ago and the budget today. Now the key thing with these numbers, these budget numbers for the school department, they include insurance. And though we pay insurance collectively as a town, I really do, and the school committee might not agree with this, but it really is important to allocate the amount of insurance the school requires to the school department. Because that's just proper accounting. You have to really know what your costs are per department. So including insurance, the school department budget in 2009 was $2.3 million. And that was at a point where enrollment was 10% higher. The budget for this coming year will be, let me find my red marker because the costs are going up. The school department budget this next coming year will be a little high, a little above $29 million. That is a 43% increase. So just to recap, enrollment's down 10%, but costs, total costs are up 43%. And I thought it was also important to understand what proportion of the budget the school takes up of our entire town's funding. Back in 2009, when I was a student, including insurance, so out of $20.3 million, with a total budget of $34 million back then, the entire school department cost us about 59% of the entire budget. Fast forward 10 years, out of $41 million, and we're spent $42 million, and we're spending over $29 million on the school department, that number has shot up to 71% of the entire budget. And let me pause for a second there. I think this is really what we have to focus on. Figuring this out, what this proper amount is, will be crucial to really addressing the needs the best way possible. I'm not going to stand here tonight and tell you I have the perfect answer to that, but this is really what we have to focus on. And in that budget workshop back on February 20th, the one person I thought made the best point of the night was Selectman John Adams. And this was sort of towards the end of the meeting. And this is after everyone sort of hashed out their differences. This was after a few tense moments. And this was sort of just before the meeting was winding down. John Adams asked, I thought, a very poignant question. He goes, what's the ceiling to this? And I think he's right, because if we, in 10 years, went from less than 60% of the budget to now we're at over 70% and climbing, I don't think that's sustainable. I say that not at all to criticize the superintendent, the business manager, the school committee. I've told this directly to them, and I'll say it now. I think they do a wonderful job properly envisioning what our school is and can be. I've had members of the school committee on this program. I've had Greg Myers on the program. I really do like his vision. I like what the school committee is advocating for students. But math is math. This is not going to work much longer. We have to figure this out. So what's driving that? Why do we see that sharp increase? Well, just based on these figures alone, I did some simple math. I mean, I took algebra here at Millbury High, so I know a couple things. So at $20 million with 1,900 students, the cost per student was $10,500 and change. What's changed? 10 years later, at $29 million, but with fewer students, just north of 1,700, that cost per student has dramatically jumped to over $16,000, almost $17,000 per student. That is a 60%, and I'm just trying to highlight this because it might not, these red markers aren't great. That's a 60% increase. That is why the school department is taking up a bigger chunk of our entire budget. So what are some of those cost drivers? Well, the school committee and the superintendent and the business manager will sort of tell you that, well, some of these things are kind of out of our control. We can't necessarily control all of our costs. And the three big examples they always cite are teacher salaries. And in the next year alone, teachers are going to get a 1.97, I believe, increase in pay. And they're right. There actually is nothing they can do about that because this was a figure that we're contractually obligated to as a town because these are the terms we agreed to under the last round of, I believe, collective bargaining. So there's nothing we can do about this significant increase. The other significant increase the school committee and the superintendent will cite are the transportation costs, the buses, to get kids to school every day. There's one company we use, AA Transportation. And every time the school goes to put out a new bid for buses, they get one proposal from AA Transportation. That dollar amount alone is about $1 million. Just to get all of our children to school every day. $1 million and climbing. The other big cost the school committee cites is special education. And as I am no expert on special education, I'm not here to tell you what all that entails, but as I understand it, some of that is mandated by the state. So if we want our accreditation as a school system, we need to properly address special education. So they were sitting at that workshop initially and saying, look, there's nothing we can do. In order to properly handle our obligations, these three big obligations, we have to ask for 5.2%. And the town manager sitting there, well, I'm sorry, we just can't afford 5.2%. Unfortunately, I think both sides are right here. I've looked at the school department's budget. I've read it. And in here, and it's readily available at the business office at the school. In here, I think they're looking at what is the best way to properly address the needs of our students. I think they're right in asking for what they're asking for. But unfortunately, the difficult thing is, after looking at the town manager's budget, I think he's right too. We can't afford everything, not just everything we want, everything we need. And I think that is why the divide remains. That is why the arguments persist. Look, I've had, like I mentioned, I had the superintendent on this program. I had the town manager on this program. I've had members of both the Board of Selectmen and the school committee on the show. I think everyone is doing the best they can to properly advocate for the base they have to advocate for. These are really difficult problems to solve. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I have a perfect solution. But just looking at the math, we're going to have to face some difficult choices. Just looking at the bus example, that's $1 million every year. Well, guess what? We don't charge for buses. And the school committee says, no, we don't want to charge families for buses. And I understand why. When my mother first bought the house I grew up in, she was a single parent and had me and my sister to take care of. So to put a roof over our head, put food on the table, put clothes on our back, she had to work 2 jobs when we first got that house. If the school said, hey, if you want your kids on the bus, you're going to have to pay us a big fee, that would have been really difficult for our family. So I understand the resistance from the school committee to change that. But very simply looking at math, if they did decide to charge fees, they want a $1.1 million increase this year. That's how they could do it. But do we want as a community to say, no, this cost we've traditionally covered, sorry, you're on the hook for that now? I don't know. Again, I think what's going to be interesting is how we as a community make these choices at town meeting. So knowing all that is going on with your money, my hope tonight is that this helps everyone get a better understanding about where we are with our tax base. What is actually happening with our dollars? Why are we seeing these costs continue to be driven upwards? I don't know what's going to happen with the budget. I have some thoughts of what should have happened already. Mainly, I think the town manager and the superintendent should have sat down a long time ago, and I think some of this could have been avoided. But what's the true answer? I think these conversations are difficult when budgets are tight. And budgets are always going to be tight. I think sometimes we have to consider, instead of worrying how to pinch pennies the best way, I think we have to look at growing dollars. Here's the issue with that, though. When one child costs $16,000 to educate, it's going to be $17,000 pretty soon. It costs the tax base more money to educate that one child, let alone 2 or 3 in a household, than that family's going to pay in property taxes. So a lot of what I've been looking at is, can we grow our commercial tax base? Or other revenues that don't involve having children in a home that you have to educate and bus before we pay for a road, pay for our police department, pay for our infrastructure, and all the other costs our town has to cover. Can we do that? Can we grow our commercial tax base? That, I think, has to be looked at, because until we start really growing our top line revenue, these conversations are only going to get more difficult. And the other thing we really have to look at is controlling our costs, because this will never be sustainable. It just won't. So where we end up, I don't know, but we're going to continue the conversation on this program so we can all address what we need as a community. That's going to do it for us tonight, folks. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend. Good night, Millbury.